hear a number of different recordings, and you will have to answer questions on what you hear. There will be time for you to read the instructions and questions, and you will have a chance to check your work. All the recordings will be played once only. The test is in 4 parts. Write all your answers in the listening question booklet. At the end of the test, you will be given 10 minutes to transfer your answers to an answer sheet. Now turn to Part 1 on page 2 of your question booklet. Part 1. You will hear a telephone conversation between a woman and a park ranger. First, you have some time to look at questions 1 to 5. Now listen carefully and answer questions 1 to 5.
Almond Valley Poppy Reserve, may I help you?
Is the nature reserve open now?
Yes, we are actually open all year, although this is the best time of year to see the wildflowers.
Are the poppies blooming yet?
Absolutely. They started to bloom last week and are already beautiful, but they should peak and be in full bloom at the end of the month.
Oh, I was planning on coming at the end of this week. Is that too early?
No, not at all. The hills are already covered with orange poppies.
I thought poppies were red.
Not in California. I've never seen a red poppy here.
The Poppy Reserve is in Ocean County, right?
Right. From Lakeside, you'll need to drive about an hour east.
What time does the reserve open?
The reserve is open from sunrise to sunset. It's best to come early in the morning to beat the crowds, but for the best photography, you might want to consider a mid-afternoon visit on a weekday.
I heard that there are a lot of rattlesnakes in the desert. Is it dangerous to walk about?
Most wildlife is quite safe. There are very few people bitten by rattlesnakes, so we do recommend wearing trousers just to be on the safe side.
All right. I was hoping that I might have the chance to see some wildlife, too. Oh, how much is the admission to the reserve?
It's $5.
Can I use my National Park Pass to enter the reserve?
Unfortunately not, since it is a state park, not a national park.
All right. I heard from a friend that there is a nature tour available. Can you tell me about it?
Certainly, but can you excuse me just a sec? I'll be right back.
Okay.
Before you hear the rest of the conversation, you have some time to look at questions 6 to 10. Now listen and answer questions 6 to 10.
Hello?
Yes, I'm still here.
Now, you are interested in the nature tours, right?
Oh, there's more than one?
Yes. We have the general tour, which is the one your friend may have taken, but we also have 2 more specialized tours. Starting at 7:30 a.m. is our general tour. That's early for some people, I know. It's offered every hour, too. But it's a great time, and it only lasts 30 minutes.
Is that the tour that takes you to the Vista Points?
Yes, that is one of the highlights, along with a film introducing the park and the museum. You're welcome to tour the museum at your leisure. It's a great tour for those who just want to take panoramic pictures with automatic cameras.
Well, if I come all that way, I'd like to have a more detailed tour.
Then you are in luck, because we have a wonderful wildflower tour every 2 hours from 8 a.m. It lasts 1 hour, and the volunteer will give you information about many of the flowers on the reserve.
Besides the poppies, will cream cups be in bloom?
Yes, and you will see lots of sage, too. We have a volunteer who is really good at giving tips on close-up photography.
You mentioned another tour.
Yes, the last one is the wildlife tour, but it is offered at very limited times.
Is that because most of the wildlife is nocturnal?
Yes, so we offer this tour only 2 times, 5:30 a.m. or 7 p.m.
Wow, that early? But don't the snakes and lizards like the sun?
Right. First, let me say it takes about an hour and a half, but you will have the opportunity to see other animals like coyotes, quail, and roadrunners. You have to get here before the crowds arrive or after most of them leave.
Well, that makes sense. Does it require a lot of walking?
More like a lot of standing, but most of the time you will be at 1 or 2 locations. So we recommend bringing a tripod and zoom lens if you want to take pictures.
Well, thank you very much. You've been extremely helpful and informative.
You're welcome. Glad I could be of service.
Goodbye.
Goodbye.
That is the end of Part 1. You now have 1 minute to check your answers to Part 1. Part 2. You will hear a talk by a volunteer who has been taking part in a project to find out what everyday life was like 2,500 years ago in Britain during the time known as the Iron Age. First, you have some time to look at questions 11 to 15. Now listen carefully and answer questions 11 to 15.
Jim Stevens has been taking part in an experiment to find out what everyday life was like in Britain over 2,500 years ago, in the period of history we call the Iron Age. He is one of a group of volunteers who have been living for the last 6 months in the sort of village that people inhabited in those days, and following the sort of daily routine that ordinary people followed then. So, Jim, tell us what you do on a typical day.
A typical day in the Iron Age village begins with rising at first light. I occasionally did that when I was at home because I loved having time to myself before the family got up. But here I do it every day because it's so light. Others also get up early because they find the straw beds rather cold. We start work immediately, usually tending to our fires which have died down in the night. I feed the cattle before starting to get breakfast ready, usually porridge that's been soaked the night before. It sounds horrid, doesn't it? But it's not so bad. As it takes such a long time to cook anything, we end up eating only twice a day. We have a late breakfast after a morning's work, and then in the evening we gather together as a community. Although the evening meal provides a chance for us to chat about the day, it can be quite chilly, so we go to bed pretty early. I think we're always hungry because we use much more energy than usual. It's all the physical exertion. A lot of time is spent just trying to get enough to eat, looking for berries and fruit and things like that. There are lots of other jobs to be done, like cooking, finding wood and keeping the fires going. The biggest priority for the blacksmiths working the forge is to tend the fire and to get it nice and hot so they can carry out their tasks. They've got various things to make: tools, cooking implements and so on. So life here is about looking after the animals and looking after ourselves. Everybody's always doing something round the fire as well. It's not as if we're just sitting there chatting. Just living, surviving, takes up most of our time. And actually, it's quite difficult to fit in other things around it. For example, you might be breaking hazelnuts, spinning some wool, or just doing things like straining milk. Here, you're finding out how to do different things every day, which keeps you on your toes and keeps you interested.
Before you hear the rest of the talk, you have some time to look at questions 16 to 20. Now listen and answer questions 16 to 20.
And I understand that you even built your own houses to live in. Round houses built in just the same way that archaeologists think that Iron Age people constructed them. So tell us exactly how you build an Iron Age roundhouse.
It's a bit like putting up a tent at first, but without the benefit of ready-made metal poles. You mark the centre of your house with a wooden peg. What you do then is loop a length of rope around it and mark out the circle to give you the outer boundary of your building. Once you've got this, you then have to dig out the ground ready for the wall. And in Iron Age times, people didn't have shovels or diggers like we do today, but used tools which they fashioned from animal bone. It must have been quite hard work. Next, you have to start on the wall. Although there were several native trees around, like the ash and the elm, the ancients preferred oak for the wall posts, which they knocked into the circle they had dug. Don't forget to leave room for the entrance, otherwise you won't be able to get into the house. Now you can begin to see the wall of the house developing. To create the framework for the final wall, the stakes were not nailed or glued onto each other as they might be today. Instead, ones with holes cut into each end are slotted over the upright posts, making what to us looks like a fence. This procedure creates a very firm structure. To support the large roof, first you need to put up a good-sized centre post, which is secured with ropes and pegs. But it's not only this which is relied upon to hold up the roof. So the next thing you have to do is build around the post a timber scaffold tower, similar to the metal ones used in Britain today. This temporary structure of wooden poles enables you to put up the main supporting beams, which are then tied together with rope and fixed to the wall plate at the bottom of the fence. The top part of this tent-like construction is strengthened with 2 ring beams. Now the framework for the roof has to be completed. Rather like weaving a basket using rods from the willow tree, hazelwood rods are linked to the beams in parallel hoops. Now you can see the house in skeletal form. The tricky bit is thatching the roof because it requires great skill. I find this very difficult. First, you take reed bundles and cut them so that each is of equal length. Then you must fix them firmly so they won't blow away in heavy winds. The final part of the process is the daubing, which in effect is like modern-day plastering. Whereas today we use plaster and paint or wallpaper, the Iron Age people had a mixture of clay, cow dung and straw, which they daubed all over the inside and outside to give the house a smooth finish.
That is the end of part 2. You now have 30 seconds to check your answers to Part 2. Part 3. You will hear two business students called Emma and Nick preparing for their presentation on the topic of how jobs might change in the future. First, you have some time to look at questions 21 to 24. Now listen carefully and answer questions 21 to 24.
Okay, Nick. The title of our presentation is How Jobs Might Change in the Future. Shall we look at the research we've done so far?
I was just watching an interview with Alex Coburn.
Go on.
He talked about a company with a call center for dealing with complaints. Instead of following a script with a list of questions they had to ask, the call center employees were told they could deal with complaints however they wanted, which went down well with them.
That's not a common approach these days.
But apparently it worked. Customers were happier with the new methods.
Really? That's certainly not the result you'd expect. We'll definitely have to use that example.
Maybe.
What about Jerry Kaplan's report? He argues there'll be plenty of jobs not suitable for machines. Like, a machine might be able to diagnose your disease, but patients will always want to talk face-to-face with their doctor. I suppose it's something to do with the fact that a human can empathise, but a machine can't.
Right. Now, there's that article called The Human Cloud. It describes the growing numbers of people being employed as contractors to do online tasks at a distance. Well, that could be good for the companies. They can choose the most expert people available, and they get cheap labor and no costs except wages. But for the workers, it may mean less money. On the other hand, I love the idea of working from home and at a time that suits.
It's certainly controversial.
Another article was the one looking at how employers will use technology to record what their employees are doing.
So awful. Cameras in the workplace checking on where you are, software that tells your boss who you've been emailing.
When we talk about this, I want to make clear how this affects people's personal privacy. Did you read how some companies are tracking the health of their employees? Surely workers won't accept that.
Yes, I'd be very surprised if this became common. Too many employees would refuse.
Before you hear the rest of the discussion, you have some time to look at questions 25 to 30. Now listen and answer questions 25 to 30.
Okay. There's some aspects of the presentation we still need to think about.
Yes, there are a few issues. Let's go through them one by one.
Okay. What about the introduction then?
Well, we've sorted out the content.
Well, your editing has helped. But don't you think you ought to deliver it rather than me? It's mainly your work.
Okay, so let's do it that way then.
Good.
What about the researcher profiles?
Kathy Bryson and Alex Coburn's backgrounds? I doubt we'll have time to look at them properly during the presentation. I reckon we should just attach that bit to the written report we're given to the tutor.
So, cut it?
Let's rehearse the whole presentation and see if it's necessary. What about the section on automation?
Aren't you happy with it?
I'm thinking I haven't really given equal attention to the pros and cons. I should start again.
Well, let's have a bit more of a think about it. You don't want to rush into a big job like that. Another thing is the section on workplace structure. I think we've got some good points, but...
We're only using one particular company as a case study. We need to source some other situations as supporting material.
So perhaps we could both do a search and compare notes.
And choose the most interesting cases.
And the section on tracking technology. Are we happy with that?
It would definitely benefit from some photos.
Hang on. There's no point using images just for decoration. We need to think about whether they'd serve any real purpose.
Fair enough. Let's make a decision on that at a later stage. And that interview we did with the company manager.
Yes, we were lucky she gave us her time.
But I just want to be sure we wrote everything down accurately. I wouldn't like to misrepresent her views. Maybe I should type up that section and send it to her so she can confirm whether or not it's correct.
Yes, that's a good idea. Go ahead.
Sounds like a plan.
Okay, and we...
That is the end of Part 3. You now have 30 seconds to check your answers to Part 3.
Section 4. You will hear an extract from a talk entitled Health on the Night Shift. First, you have some time to look at questions 31 to 40 on pages 8 and 9. Now listen carefully and answer questions 31 to 40.
Good afternoon, everybody. In this session, I want to continue looking at health issues relating to the workplace. And I'd like to focus today on night shift workers and the health problems that are associated with their working hours. I'm sure you're all aware that there has been a huge increase in the number of workers doing regular night shifts in recent years, mainly because of the number of shops and services now open 24 hours, 7 days a week. And we need to look more closely at the consequences of changing work and sleep patterns like this. So that's what I'd like us to do today. Now, research that has been carried out in both the US and Britain on night working suggests that it leads to a lot of health problems for the workers, and they point to three main reasons for this. The first one is what they call the internal clock, and this is a basic sort of program in our brains. This tells us that at certain times we should feel hungry, at other times we should be awake, at other times we should be asleep, and so on. And it seems to be generally accepted by all the experts in the field that this clock is linked to not just our behavioral habits, but to cycles of light and dark, and that means that we're programmed to be awake when it's light, i.e. during the day, and asleep when it's dark. The second thing is that night workers are continually fighting against what is termed a sleep debt. And by this, the researchers mean that it's just practically impossible for them to get a sufficient amount of sleep in daylight hours. In fact, studies suggest that on average, night workers only get between 5 and 6 hours of sleep, rather than the 8 they need. And the effects of not getting enough sleep can also lead to all sorts of problems, and we'll talk about those in a minute. The third cause of these problems is the unsocial hours that night workers have to keep. The fact that they are working when their families, their friends are sleeping, and vice versa. And that kind of dislocation from their social group can be very damaging. Okay, so let's take a closer look at some of these effects. And if we have a look at the physical effects first, we can see that studies on long-term shift workers found that they were much more likely to get heart problems than day workers. In addition, there seems to be a very high incidence of stomach problems, for example, ulcers among night shift workers. And although this may be partly due to the wrong sort of diet, snacking on fast food, it can't be just explained by eating habits. And finally, there is evidence to suggest that night shift workers also get ill more frequently with minor problems like colds and infections. The frequency of these illnesses is much higher than among day workers, and this indicates that night working can damage immunity to illness. And of course, this leads to a lot of absence from work, too. However, although the physical impact of working nights can be severe, perhaps the real problems are psychological ones. And the most common problem is depression. This seems to be the inevitable result of the constant feeling of tiredness and a lack of energy that night workers universally complain of. Secondly, there is a lot of evidence from accident statistics to suggest that mental abilities are badly affected, and that means, for example, decision-making ability and planning ability. And these are what control our performance. For example, we can see that the highest number of errors on the roads occur between 3 a.m. and 5 a.m., the point in our internal clock when we feel most sleepy. Okay. Finally, there are the social problems, where night working impacts on the family and social life of the employees. The first one is obviously the breakup of family life, and here we can see from the divorce statistics that this occurs more frequently in the case of night workers. But there's also the breakdown of other relationships, not just within the family, but among the peer group. Night workers tend to lose touch with friends, and these relationships, especially for the long-term night workers, are very difficult to rebuild. And so this eventually leads to social isolation for the individual, and of course that has consequences for the whole community too. So we can begin to see the real cost of night working. What we need to do now is to look at how...
That is the end of section 4. You now have half a minute to check your answers. That is the end of the listening test. You now have 10 minutes to transfer your answers to the listening answer sheet.